Governments never hesitate to claim that they are making the economy better. In fact, they love saying it. They talk about steady growth, crisis-free management, and new opportunities. But when you look back into history, the picture you see is much darker. For centuries, those in power have used invisible financial mechanisms not to improve the lives of ordinary people whose earnings barely rise above the poverty line, but to protect their own wealth and influence. And here is the strange part. None of this was invented in our century. It is a cycle that has repeated for hundreds of years. Only the packaging changes, the names change. But the underlying idea stays exactly the same. Make people with small budgets dependent on the system so that wealth keeps accumulating at the top. Let's start with one of the oldest, almost invisible tricks: inflation. When governments spend more than they earn, they have two choices. Either they openly admit their mistakes and raise taxes, which is risky for their political careers, or they quietly reduce the value of money. Slowly, every coin and banknote becomes worth less. This means that if 10 units of money once bought 10 pieces of candy, now it only buys 5. Ancient Rome perfected this strategy. As military costs increased, emperors reduced the silver content in the denarius, replacing it with copper and covering it with a thin silver layer. Officials ignored the consequences. Ordinary people paid the price. Savings disappeared. Salaries no longer covered basic living costs. This was effectively an invisible tax, and it still exists today. Only now, the imperial mints have been replaced with central banks. In the Middle Ages, another method was used: forced loans. Kings in England, France, and Spain would politely ask rich merchants and guilds to lend money to the crown, but refusal meant fines, confiscation, or worse. Sometimes the money was repaid with interest, but usually late, in devalued currency, or not at all. It funded wars and royal lifestyles. Open coercion was disguised as patriotism, and it worked flawlessly for centuries. By the 17th century, the game evolved again. When the Bank of England was founded in 1694, it was not to help anyone. The state needed large amounts of money to finance wars against France. Wealthy investors bought government bonds, and in return, the state guaranteed interest payments funded by public taxes. It sounds fair, until you ask, who paid those taxes? Ordinary people buying salt, beer, and cloth. The rich lent money to the government and earned risk-free interest. The public repaid it. This national finance system was simply a mechanism for transferring wealth upward, and it still is. Lending to governments remains the safest investment in the world because returns are guaranteed by the labor, production, and consumption of the public. In the modern world, the game is everywhere. Governments take on massive debts, issue bonds, and sell them to investors, banks, and foreign states. Citizens are told the money funds infrastructure, jobs, and social benefits, but much of it flows to the defense industry, corporate subsidies, and bailouts. When repayment time arrives, governments do not cut spending at the top. Instead, they raise taxes, reduce social support, or devalue money through inflation. The rule is simple. Debt is presented as for the people, but the burden falls on the people, while the profits flow to bondholders and financial elites. Then there are bailouts. In 2008, banks took reckless risks and nearly collapsed the global economy. Who paid? Ordinary taxpayers. Who emerged stronger? The same banks. Profits were private. Losses were public. Even pension and social security systems are often illusions. Workers pay in for decades believing the money will be there later, but most governments do not save this money. They spend it immediately and replace it with a promise. It becomes a state-sanctioned intergenerational Ponzi structure. Eventually, the system strains under aging populations and reform arrives. Higher retirement ages, lower benefits, or silent erosion through inflation. Everything runs on perception. Inflation is called growth. Forced loans become patriotic duty. Government debt becomes investment. Bailouts become stability. Pension cuts become reform. In reality, wealth flows from the many to the few, and has for centuries. And as the system becomes more complex, new tools emerge. Quantitative easing, hidden taxes through inflation and consumption levies, regulatory capture by powerful industries, war financing justified as patriotism, and above all, complexity as a shield. Thousands of pages of tax codes and financial jargon make sure the public never truly understands where money flows, because if they do not understand it, they cannot oppose it. Here is the situation now. Inflation erodes your savings. Debt keeps growing. Bailouts never end. Central banks steer the markets, and the bill always goes to the public. The system does not exist to make you wealthy. It exists to sustain itself. History proves this. Rome's citizens suffered. Medieval merchants suffered. Today, ordinary families carry the burden. And the saddest part? Most people do not even realize the game is being played. They think inflation is normal, taxes unavoidable, bailouts acts of kindness. Ignorance is the system's strongest weapon. That is why financial literacy is a defense line. Economic history is real power. If this video helped you see things differently, if you felt something while listening, you can support me by liking, subscribing, and commenting. Understand the system, then act accordingly. If I've offered you a different perspective, you can support me by commenting, liking, and subscribing.